Welcome to Relevant Revitalization, where you will find out the good, bad, and ugly of church revitalization. You will hear from pastors who have been through the revitalization experience, experts in the field, and much more, all with the goal of equipping, encouraging, and engaging you, your leadership, and your congregation to see God-breathed life in your church. Now, let's get into some relevant revitalization.
Welcome back to another episode of Relevant Revitalization. I'm your host, Matt Coyne, and today I have the privilege of speaking with Mark DeVries, founder of Ministry Architects, and just a few books, author of Family-Based Youth Ministry, Sustainable Youth Ministry, co-author of Sustainable Children's Ministry, Sustainable Youth or Young Adult Ministry. Again, I didn't even get to them all, but Mark, as someone who spent 12 years in youth ministry and has turned to your books many times for insight and wisdom, it is an honor to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Matt. Great to be with you, brother.
Yeah. So I know I shared a little bit about you, but can you share with us a little bit more about your ministry experience, your passions, family, all that fun stuff?
Sure. Well, I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and have been here since 1986. I was a youth pastor at one church for 28 years, which meant the kids in my youth group became the parents of the kids in my youth group, which was pretty, frankly, pretty sweet. In 2001, 2002, I moved to a part-time role at the church, and they freed me up to start what eventually would become Ministry Architects, which is really pretty much a straightforward consulting group for churches. We sort of joke that we do everything but music and capital campaigns. So, strategic planning, executive coaching, revitalization. We do some searches. We do, we have a virtual assistant company that, churches that have hired Mrs. McGillicuddy 30 years ago to answer the phone and file things. They now need something really different in terms of their admin support. And so there are a lot of churches that are beginning to use a virtual assistant to do a lot of that work. I have one wife and 3 children. All 3, it's fun. All 3 of my kids there was one year where all 3 of them were in seminary together.
Wow.
And they are all, they're like 7 years spread, but they all happen to be there at the same time. So they all are in ministry of one kind or another. And that's just a kick. And my son-in-law is actually now the leader of Ministry Architects. I work for him. Which is pretty delightful. About 10 years ago, my friend Kenda Dean, who you may know from youth ministry books, Kenda and I started a little company called Ministry Incubators, which is more kind of social enterprise incubation. So it's ministry, it's people in ministry that have a harebrained idea. And it's often, there's often an alternative economic engine. I think what we all know is that churches have been built on boomer giving patterns, and I'm a boomer. I'm going to be dead before most of the the other generations, right? And so the idea is the church has got to come up with some different ways of generating revenue to support their ministries. So that's the real focus of Ministry Incubators. And I think that's plenty to get us started. And I'm ready to dive in and talk about family ministry.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing a little bit about your life and, especially ministry incubators. So that's a neat, ministry you have there because I was interviewing someone yesterday and the term baby boomers came up again, talking about changing in the church and being willing to do that. And that leads us perfectly right into, family ministry. Revitalization is near and dear to me, but family ministry is right there as well. And, in the revitalization journey, so many churches who are near death or unhealthy, really, I can almost guarantee that they're struggling in this area of family ministry. So, Mark, right off the bat, why is building a healthy family ministry vital when it comes to revitalization, the revitalization of a church?
Well, as Jesus began, his initial family, right? He never sent his disciples out one at a time. There is an usness about what it means to be Christian, what it means to be church, and a lot of times, I think, especially in the evangelical church, we have made it wildly individualistic, and the whole focus is, let's get this individual to make this individual decision. Yeah, the biblical story is a little different. That we are formed, a community is shaped and formed together. And so, Matt, I'm going to expand a little bit on the notion of family ministry, building on, the story from Luke chapter 2 of the only adolescent story we have of Jesus. They take him to the temple in Jerusalem. He's 12 years old, and they do the thing there, and they start their journey back at the end of the first day. So 12 hours or 10 hours or however long they've been walking, Mary and Joseph look at each other and they say, do you know where Jesus is? No, I've not seen the Lamb of God who taketh away the sins of the world. I do not know where Jesus is. Now, Matt, if you went on vacation with your kids and you didn't see them for 10 hours, you'd call that bad parenting, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
But the biblical story is embedded in this sense of they didn't necessarily need to know where he was for those 8 or 10 hours because they were sure that he was with Uncle Abinadab or Aunt Naomi, or somebody had him. There was this sense of we're raising these kids together. And I think one of the big, I've gone a bit off. I'm coming back to your questions.
No, you're good. You're good.
In sort of a modern America period, but American Christianity, it's all upside down pyramid on top of the mom and dad, and all the responsibility for forming a child's faith and forming their life is on the mom and dad. And so you have all of these books that teach parents how to get the right technique so their kid's going to turn out right. But Hebrews 12, we're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. So run with endurance the race set before you. When you're surrounded, you're going to run better. But we have stripped away the biblical ecology of faith formation. And then we wonder why kids have a pretty tinnish, sort of thin kazoo-like faith instead of a symphony-like faith, right? So when I think about family ministry, a lot of churches are thinking, oh, gee, if we can just get more young families in the church, that will solve all of our problems. Because, young families have lots of money to tithe with. Says the father of a young family, right? And so I want to turn that a little bit on its ear. What if we were not looking at family ministry as a way to build our church, but if we looked at ways the church can serve and help families in our community? What would happen? Let me tell you, you want to have a full family ministry? Have a full children's ministry? Create a program for kids with special needs. They'll come. because there's no place that's doing that. That's the blue ocean that very few churches are playing in. You want to have a program for a lot of kids? Do something for immigrant kids. Do something for kids that don't have anything going on. But instead, we're competing for the kids who play soccer every Sunday morning, right? And let's try to get more of those into our church because they look like us. So I want to turn the notion of family ministry into something more missional. What if we leaned into the health of families right around us? My son has a ministry that focuses on surrounding foster families with partners a foster family with an individual church. It's called Crowded Table. So a church will support that foster family with meals, with transportation, with coming to graduations, going to games, cheering for kids. And so what happens is the foster families then stay in the game longer, right? Mm-hmm. So again, that's another pretty great group. If you want to build, rather than trying to compete against everybody else, trying to find that thin slice of people like us who will tithe, how about we focus on, let's create something that is such a blessing to this particular population of people around us. I mean, you and I have both been in churches where the kids do something in a worship service. Mm-hmm. They sing, they give a testimony, they light a candle, they come down front for children's sermon. It doesn't matter. The energy in the room goes up, right? Because everybody says, that one's mine. That one's ours. That one's ours. And so, yeah, that's a long answer to why is it so important for churches to do this. Churches come alive when there are young people around them, and God has a way of smuggling the gospel, especially to people my generation, through children and youth in a congregation.
Mark, I cannot express how much I appreciate what you just said. Back to the beginning when you said that Jesus sent his disciples. I think the church in the 90s, early 2000s got so stuck in their ways that church was more of a social status than an actual spiritual journey. And I think we got so set in our ways, the church in America, of no, they'll come to us. Church is on a Sunday morning. I cannot believe that the school is scheduling. It is sad, but at our church, and this is not about me, but just to share an experience that at our church, we began a Saturday evening service because I said Sundays aren't working for families. We started reaching out to the schools. We did meals for the teachers. We did takeout meals. We did lunch for the teachers. And then now I'm in a very small community of only one school district, 1,200 people. So it's different for my setting, but it doesn't take away the fact that you just said, we have to go into the community. Instead of just saying, I tell youth pastors all the time, I say, stop going into the schools and saying, we're going to do this, this, and this for you. Go into the schools and say, we're here for you. How can we help you? What needs can we fill? That's going to build relationships, and that's going to build the trust in the community. And people are going to say, this church truly does care for us. They don't care about our money. They don't care about numbers. They care about us. So I can't express how much I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
And along those lines, you did share, insight on churches who are desperately wanting to see families in their church. But, for the first year of us being in our church, every Sunday it was our two daughters. And as a family in that season, it was hard to watch both of our daughters come home from church and say, Daddy, we have no friends. This is boring. It was hard. And so for those churches who are in desperate need of, or not, I want to say need, those desperate search for families that they want the church to grow younger. I know you shared a little bit, but what other insight do you have? Going to the community, but is there anything else you have? And I'll give you an example too before you answer it. Maybe this will help clear it up. That we just kept having children's ministry. It didn't matter if it was our 2 kids. We just kept doing it. I kept telling the elders, I said, families aren't going to show up if we don't offer something. And so my wife taught my 2 girls every single Sunday for a year.
Wow.
And we just kept going. But do you have any other insight on top of that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, we often imagine that family ministry is about us teaching parents how to parent. Like I taught my first parenting class when I was 19 years old, as if I knew what I was talking about.
I did the same thing, and it's like a rite of passage for a youth pastor.
You all have so much to learn from me, right? What would happen if instead of saying, "Hey, y'all, come to our meeting," if we said, we want to celebrate the people in our community who serve children, and once a quarter, you bring in, teacher of the year, or you bring in, somebody that's a great soccer coach or whatever, a scout leader, and you elevate. Again, so much of church has been shining the light on us and saying, "Oh, aren't we great? Please come to my thing because I'm great." What would happen if we were more like John the Baptist in that painting that hung behind Karl Barth's desk? Where, and remember, this is a great story. It's a picture of Christ on the cross, and John the Baptist is pointing at Jesus, and Karl Barth said, "I want to be the end of that finger. That's my job." Right? What if we shine the light on the people that are serving kids? So, I often, once a year, I get invited to an event that is honoring some friend of mine. Like, they were the woman of the year for all their work with whatever they've done. Right. So I want to go to support my friend. Right. And so people come to those things as we honor and let people. We create a whole program around it. There are testimonies, there are kids sharing, there's all kind of things that we orchestrate to celebrate, to highlight the amazing work that children's ministry that are doing in town. And so basically it's a thank you dinner. But what you're doing for the community is saying, wow, this is a place that really cares about kids more than they care about their marketing campaign and their social media strategy, right? The other possibility is, there are millions of these, but the other possibility is you find the thing that you like to do, and you gather people around that thing you like to do, families around that. So, my granddaughter really loves to do rock climbing at the rock climbing gym. So how about we get 5 families that go do rock climbing, then we have dinner together, and then we create a little routine for 6 or 8 weeks. But the whole idea, or, I've got a friend who does this thing called Camp Grandma, and she is in her neighborhood. Her name's Stephanie Caro. She's one of our consultants. She's amazing. And kids, almost every day after school, kids come to her house for Camp Grandma, and she's got hot chocolate, or she's got some craft for them to do. But just opening the space for kids to show up, a neighborhood grandma. What would happen in your little neighborhood if you did grandma cooked meals on Wednesday night for the neighbors and you did it for 6 weeks? If you want to have a great grandma cooked meal, the whole idea is finding ways that tap into the deep longing of families. Because I can bet, and you've had this experience, Matt, you haven't told me, but I'm sure you have, at those events, whether it's a soccer game or a dinner, somebody's going to walk up to you and say, Pastor, I got to tell you something our family's really struggling with. And there it goes. But the whole point is, can we hold space for people to bring their whole self and to feel like they are connected and not disconnected? But most people feel like the church is the last place they're going to be welcomed. Because they're all the trap doors of, well, if you are this, or if you did this, or they feel welcome almost, right? Anyway, so those are, it feels like if you and I were at Starbucks, I have a feeling that we could come up with 600 different things you could try.
Yeah.
And the name of the game in family ministry is, it doesn't have to work for it to work. Let me say it. That's youth ministry too, by the way.
Yes.
You have an event and 2 families come. You're planning on 60 and 2 families come. You have all this extra food and those 2 families feel wildly loved. And you can spend all of your time feeling like, well, what about those other 58 people that we don't have here? Or you can just say, man, we love having you here. Thanks for being here. Right. Yeah. Back to you, Bob.
No, that's good. So a couple episodes ago, I quoted Disney. Now I'm going to quote Daniel Tiger when Daniel Tiger says, enjoy the wow that's happening now. And I think that we as pastors struggle. So I'm really theological, Mark. I'm really
see
deep.
That you've got some Daniel Tiger books behind you, right?
He knows his stuff. But I think as pastors, we so often, I'm glad you brought that up, that we are so worried about what's not happening. Like you said, there's only 2 families here. And that is another, I can't stress that enough, that the event wasn't a failure if only 2 showed up. Treat those 2 families just as you would have if 60 are there, and keep doing it. Just because 2 showed up doesn't mean it was a bad event. It doesn't mean that it wasn't impactful for those 2 families. It means that you gotta enjoy the wow that's happening now. And here's the thing. Maybe it was a bad event. Mark, I'm sure you've had it. I know I've had it in my ministry where I thought this was going to be the greatest thing in the world, and it fell flat on its face, and it was a terrible event. Yeah. That's okay, and you have to admit that. But there are times when that's just not the case. It was a good event. You just got to keep building those relationships. And so I appreciate you sharing that side of it.
Well, the church of 2024, where we are now, just barely, is a church that will only live by experimentation. We have been a church that has been propped up by institutions, and the institutions are crumbling. And that's not all that bad news. I'm working on a book. Who knows if it'll ever happen, but it's called "The Church Has Left the Building." And the whole idea and subtitle is something like that. It's not all that bad. The church doesn't belong in the building, and the whole, this whole notion of micro churches, and I don't know if you're familiar with Fresh Expressions, which came out of England. The whole, the Fresh Expressions are like, okay, let's create a hike church, and we're just going to go hiking every Sunday morning. Or, what would happen with your church if on Sunday morning, we, instead of complaining about the soccer team, you went out and you were the big cheerleaders at the soccer game and held up your big signs. Way to go.
Yes.
And or offered, free Capri Suns or whatever. Right.
Yeah.
So But what we're realizing, especially with this work in ministry incubators, is that experimentation, laboratorization, collaboratories, we're creating opportunities for people to experiment. And COVID, even churches that refused to innovate during COVID had to innovate.
Yes. And again, glad you brought that up, because I was going to say that too, that one of the great things I think that came out of COVID was churches had to be willing to think outside the box.
Yeah.
The saying, are we doing it just because we've always done it? That really became a marching order for me, at least, for saying, are we doing this just because we've always done it? We live in a different time, and that's okay. I mean, look at some of the strongest churches in the world. They're being persecuted. They're having to think outside of the box to meet. And I think I always say that we, as the American church, are living this cushy life. We're used to the Sunday morning time, and that's what it is. And I always say, if you're relying on that hour a week, or you're relying on that time, I'm gonna encourage you to check yourself if you're a genuine disciple. And I know we're getting now into discipleship, but yeah, I can't agree with you more. Think outside of the box, find what the community needs, and meet those needs. And here's the other thing: don't try to meet every need. You're one church. You're not going to meet every need, but find something that you can meet and go with that and do it well. So, all right. So Mark, along those lines, okay, so now we're a church. What we're doing a case study here. We're a church. It's growing younger. Families are starting to come in, and they're seeing new life breathe into the church, and it's so exciting. But the older generation is now feeling left out, and you have the older generation saying, "We want younger families. We want younger families." Then it happens, but then they go, "But now you're making decisions for the younger families and not us." How does a pastor make sure that the older generation doesn't feel that way, but also maintain the excitement that there are little ones running around the church?
Yeah. Well, we to some extent we own our helplessness, and we recognize that people feel what they feel. That being said, there are things we can do that make it more likely that the older generation is engaged. Let me just throw out a few possibilities. We're really talking about a shift in culture, and you actually, as a leader of a congregation, you actually have the power to turn culture from sort of skepticism and what about me and nobody cares about me, to, wow, this is so exciting what we do, right? But turning culture is typically I say about a 3-year time period. And so a lot of times when we're trying to create change in our church or answer a question like what you suggested, we think, oh, what's the one thing I can do that flips the switch? Yeah. But you're really talking about a change in ecology, and you have the power to do that. But it's not going to happen immediately. It's going to sort of build on itself. So let me give you the quick 4 steps of changing culture. The first one is you got to trust the process. So you relax and don't freak out. You don't say, well, what about all these old people? They don't get it. They let them feel what they feel. That's okay. We often resist change out of fear and fear of loss. And even if the loss hasn't come yet, but it's a loss of control. So you just trust the process. Like, you may remember this illustration of, bamboo farming. You with me on bamboo farming?
No, I've not heard this illustration.
If you go to your friendly neighborhood bamboo store and you pick up a little baby bamboo plant, you plant it in your yard, and you come back out 6 months later, do you know what you got?
Hopefully bamboo.
You would think. But in fact, what you have is the same thing you planted. These little sticks just poking up, nothing's happening. And you're thinking, what is the problem with my bamboo? The Baptists have great bamboo. Why can't I get good bamboo? And And you come back a year later, you know what you got? You come back
Still the
2
same
years
thing?
later, you come back 3 years later in the fullness of time. Something goes off in the bamboo brain and it says, it's time. And when bamboo starts growing, it can grow as much as 4 feet in 24 hours.
Wow.
I mean, that was on Google, so I'm sure it's true.
Yeah, it has to be. Yeah.
So if I don't understand bamboo, I get freaked out in those first 3 years of I'm not seeing anything. But if I understand bamboo, I know, trust me, we're going to have plenty of bamboo here. Right?
Yeah.
So it's this
That's
sort of
good.
relaxed, non-anxious, joyful posture. This is going to happen, right? The next thing is you got to deliver some results. And so let's just say the culture you're changing is a culture of unity between the older generation, the boomer and older generation, and the younger families. And so you do a prayer partner program, or you do an adopt a grandparent thing, or we did a senior prom for the senior citizens in our church.
Oh, that's fun.
And each senior was matched with a teenager, and we took the pictures of them, under the, whatever, disco under the sea, kind of thing, whatever. And every one of those senior citizens got a picture of them with their kid that was under the thing, they put it on the refrigerator. Just one little win. And it could be as simple as inviting two grandmas to teach kids how to bake cookies at Christmas time. And you bring kids over to the house, they bake cookies. And then in church on one Sunday morning, let me tell y'all what happened this weekend. There it goes, right?
Yeah.
So a little result, just something so it says we're not just talking here. Then you're going to memorialize that result. That's step 3. You're going to memorialize that with some stories or some metaphors. So you're just saying, hey, for our Minute for Mission today, Jenny's going to get up and tell us, Jenny and Mrs. Johnson are going to get up and tell us about their cookie club. So Jenny says, last Saturday, I got to spend the morning with Miss Johnson, and she taught me how to make cookies. And then we took them over to some of her friends who are at the nursing home. It was so cool. And then Miss Johnson says, let me tell you, Jenny was amazing about it. So you're just letting the narrative. I mean, it's the Disney rule. The person that tells the best stories wins. And you're just you're memorializing that with a story. And then finally you're celebrating with some sort of ritual or tradition. So, and this might be a thing where every year in all the children come to the front in the worship service, and they're prayed over and commissioned into their school year, whether they're 3 or they're 18, and every one of them has a granny or a grandpa behind them with their hands on them. Come on, baby. And they all pray for the kids. And then, and you could find a similar thing for somebody has their 50th wedding anniversary, or, they have a milestone birthday, and 2 or 3 kids in the front of the church lay their hands on the granny and grandpa or whoever it is and pray for them in their next chapter of ministry. So having some way of sealing it with there are things you can say during a ritual that it's often awkward to say when you're not. So for example, we did a thing called a senior banquet, and, not that creative. All the graduating seniors were celebrating them. This is not senior citizens. These are high school seniors. Then we extended it to include the parents. So all the parents came to the senior banquet, and we asked every parent to stand over their son or daughter and pray a blessing over them. Now, these are people who don't pray out loud, a lot of them.
Yeah.
Some may not even be Christians. they put their hands on their kid and they speak a blessing over their kid. Because of the environment of this banquet, they feel free to do that in ways they might never feel free to do it at their own house, right? So a ritual has a way of. So again, that's just a way of sort of working the process of transitioning from a senior citizen skeptical culture to a man, we're in this together.
I love that.
You could do a whole sermon series on Eli and Samuel, and that Samuel had ears to hear God in ways that Eli didn't, but Samuel didn't know it was God without Eli helping him hear it. Right. So there's so many texts where we're just saying the generations belong together. And every one of them has got a different way of smuggling the gospel into these relationships.
That intergenerational ministry, I think, is because it can get frustrating when there's so much excitement in the church, but then you have people, it's like, but this is what you wanted. No, don't get frustrated with it. Like, I like how you said, accept it, and people are going to feel what they feel, but be intergenerational about it. And, a little plug for your, especially sustainable youth ministry. I know as you were talking, I'm like, some of this, in your book, Sustainable Youth Ministry, you talk about that culture change too. Yeah. So it's funny when you I'm like, this sounds so familiar. And I'm like, I read this. So I appreciate you sharing that there's that culture of change. Nobody likes change. One of the things that drives me up a wall is whenever I hear someone come to me and say, Matt, I don't like change. And I don't say this, but I'm like, my 9-year-old doesn't like change. I mean, she is a creature of habit. Most of us are. Now, I love change. I don't like change just for change, but I like change because let's get out of the rut. Let's get out of what we're used to. Let's find new ways to minister. So I appreciate how practical you're being during this time, Mark, because I think for pastors, that's what we need, just practical application that we can take and as you said, experiment in our church. Yeah. So thank you.
There's a great scene, you've probably seen it, where there's a preacher up in the pulpit and the congregation's out in front. He says, how many of you want to see change? They all raise their hands. And then the next frame is, how many of you want to change? They're all looking at their feet. Everybody wants to see, let's get more young families. Let's empower more young leaders. But a lot of times the people in my generation are just afraid to get out of the way to create space for the generation to come behind them.
Yeah. Again, great point. I know it's hard. I understand it's hard to let go. I in my church came in following a legacy pastor 29 years, and I implemented some changes that I know were tough for people to handle, but I was humbled that I appreciated people came and talked to me about it, but I also appreciated them going, we trust you. And I was saying before we started recording, Mark, I'm like, I'm 36 years old. Well, I haven't earned your trust, but they did. Mm. And I appreciate that. But then when they started seeing the changes, I think they're like, oh, okay, but no, this is good, but we're not doing this anymore. Yeah. And I get it, and so that's for me, I'm trying to be compassionate and sympathetic to that because, I kind of think of it this way, that many people, so our church is, the church itself is about 90 years old. And there are people who have been going to this church for 60, 70 years. Yeah. And I need to remind myself, they're literally mourning a death. I mean, not of a person, but of a ministry or an idea or a type of leadership.
Yeah.
So, well, Mark, I appreciate you coming on, and this is such a fun conversation. I love family ministry. I think it is, as we've talked about, if you're listening, you can hear Mark's passion about getting involved into the life of families, and don't just expect them to come to church. Get out into the community. We talk about that so often. Get out in the community and see where those needs are. And so, Mark, before you head out, though, I do want to remind our listeners that Ryan over Promotions Guy makes it financially possible for me to give away resources each episode. So today, we're going to give away the Sustainable Bundle, Sustainable Children's, Youth, and Young Adult Ministry. And I don't like to make it gimmicky, but I need to know if you're interested. So I'm going to post later this week just a post that you have to like to be in the drawing for that. Again, it's just, if you don't want this resource, that's why I need you to like the post so I know if you are interested in it or not. But I really appreciate Ryan doing this. As I say almost every week, you also get a free shirt that Ryan prints over Promotions Guy. Go to promotionsguy.com to find out more about what he has to offer for your church. They print anything from golf balls to t-shirts. And he, more importantly, loves the Lord and loves his church. So, Mark, thank you again for taking some time out of your busy schedule to be here to talk about church revitalization, family ministry. But before you head out, any parting encouragement for our listeners?
Yeah, man, I think my one thought is as a parent, I had these 3 very different kids growing up, and we were failures in different ways with each one of them. If there are parents listening that are not just talking about family ministry, but are also thinking about their own families, the perhaps simplest and most profound thing you can do is to find ways to surround your kids with lots of godly adults. So invite them over for dinner, go on an outing together, take a little weekend thing, do a family retreat, go camping. But the whole idea is kids will thrive in direct proportion to the number of adults that they can see themselves through, the eyes of the adults that they can see themselves through. My kids had so many adults who thought they were amazing. They just eventually had to believe it for themselves, who thought they had a gift from God to live into. Eventually they had to believe it. So it's not a technique. It's not like, how do you do the best family devotion? How do you do the best prayers at bedtime? All of those are great, but even when we're failing and we don't feel like our relationship with our kids is where we want it to be, when we surround our kids with godly adults, when they run away, instead of running to their friends or their phone, they're going to run into the arms of this great cloud of witnesses that you get to constellate for your kids. That's my final thought for this.
Why? That's a good one. I like the personal touch on that because, in ministry, our families are first. And obviously God is first. Our discipleship is to our families first and foremost. So thank you for sharing that. Finally, as always, I just want to say, my goal through this podcast is to equip, encourage, engage pastors in your revitalization journey. Please reach out to me on social media if you just want to chat about revitalization in your church, in your ministry, or if you just need someone to talk to. I know how important it is to have that fellow pastor, that fellow ministry leader to pray with, to walk alongside. I'm here for you. Again, Mark, thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate it so much. And until next time, this is Relevant Revitalization, and we'll see you next week.